one of the biggest fan base rivalries that I've seen in entertainment is, more recently than not, is Marvel versus DC, guys. This is like Star Wars versus Star Trek. I mean, and the list goes on, right? Marvel and DC, these are two passionate fan bases, proud fan bases of the movies, of the comic books, and they will defend those comics and and their movies, whatever the case might be, to the end, essentially. And so, guys, this should be a really interesting topic, because one thing that I have tried to do on this YouTube channel, so I'll give you guys, some of the facts, and then I'll give you guys, of course, some of my personal opinions, and then I like passing a lot of those opinions on to you guys, and we have conversations about them. So with that, guys, I'd certainly want to hear yours in the comment section below after we're done with this topic, because this is going to be a pretty interesting one. So here's the thing, guys. I'm going to explain in this last segment of the show why Marvel is winning the cinematic war against DC, but how they're doing it and why they're doing it and how this could stay sustainable, or how DC could very well take the throne away from Marvel at some point, which seems, probably in the long foreseeable future. So let's talk about it. So guys, Marvel and DC, both of these have been two, fan bases, two franchises that I love, right? I grew up more of a DC fan, and as the movies came out, Marvel, I started to really love some of those characters after the cinematic universe happened. And here's, in my opinion, what happened with these two franchises. One, kind of took the approach, a conservative approach, and kind of built the franchise slowly but surely. And the other tried a little bit too much too quickly and ended up kind of spiraling out of control, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean that either one of these franchises or fan bases are right or wrong, and it doesn't really, a lot of it, guys, can get convoluted in everything. So here we go with it, guys. Marvel, what did they do right at this point? So Marvel decides to start building a culture more than anything around their cinematic universe. And so what I mean by that, guys, is they started out small. They started out, creating, likable characters. And they started off with Iron Man. And this was a great way for them to start, guys. And they start to slowly build the franchise from that core that started tying things in, but later on. Whereas DC had the upper hand at first, that being Christopher Nolan's 3 Batman movies, the Dark Knight trilogy, as it's called. They had the upper hand because they bring out these 3 movies and many people absolutely love them. I'm one of those people. I thought that they were great. The Dark Knight was probably the best out of all of them, but I loved, The Dark Knight Rises as well as Batman Begins. I thought that they were great movies overall, and I thought that DC would have been smart, or Warner Brothers as well, would have been very smart to continue right where The Dark Knight Rises left off, that being, of course, Robin being elevated to, like, the next guy up, and kind of followed that story from there. But they decided not to do that and kind of put the DC, cinematic universe in a indefinite hiatus at that point, whereas Marvel is still kind of building this culture around Iron Man and then, of course, some of their other superheroes. DC, then, of course, they start seeing the success that Marvel's having, right? And they started sort of kind of try to reboot everything once again after all the it felt like years later, until they started kind of rebooting the DC cinematic universe. And look, when they brought out, Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, and then they bring out Justice League, and they've, Suicide Squad, and all of these movies were good ideas, but they were trying too hard, that being Warner Brothers and DC, to catch up to where Marvel was. Whereas Marvel was building this organic, culture around their movies and really building hype. Warner Brothers and DC were trying to play catch up, kind of, pushing out these movies that where, of course, like, to try to compete, like Justice League trying to get that to compete against, of course, the Avengers, which it would have done very well, in my opinion. I believe Justice League would have been an absolute juggernaut, even though it was pretty big, and so was Batman versus Superman. There was a ton of hype around it. But all in all, there was so much hype that was built around Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, and when it came out, many were just really upset. I know myself, I was really excited for it, but then, of course, when you see that the fight between Batman and Superman was like only a few minutes long, and it just really didn't land well, at least for a lot of us fans. And of course, the Superman movies were good as well, guys. I mean, Man of Steel was really good. They really tried, but I think what the difference between these two franchises, as far as from a cinematic standpoint, Marvel built it from an organic perspective, and they had like these phases, these ideas of kind of slowly but surely building this thing to what it is today, whereas DC, it's felt like, has just been trying to play catch up, even though they were the ones in the driver's seat, at least between those first 3 Batman movies that came out. So now, where are we at? After everything is said and done, the dust has settled. You have Marvel that has absolutely, I mean, just done an incredible job. Kind of just everyone wants to watch all of the Marvel movies simply because the characters are likable. You see some of these other characters that are in the Avengers, which of course was the big movies, and then you wanted to watch their side stories and such. And so what they did was they built this really great, culture around it. Whereas with DC, with Justice League, you see all these other characters and you kind of want to see some of their, backstories, but then none of those get greenlit, and now all of it, now we're at this point where Ben Affleck no longer is Batman already, and now you've got, of course, Robert Pattinson playing as Batman, which could be a disaster, or it could be great. Who knows? All we know, guys, is that now you've got Batman. The Batman is going to be coming out. And I'm not saying it's the last chance for Warner Brothers and DC to get this thing right, because they've made a lot of money. They made a lot of money from Batman versus Superman, as well as Justice League. It wasn't nearly as much as that of, the Avengers movies, but still really good for what it was, especially for the movies not really doing very well from a critical standpoint, like a critical reception, and, just what people thought of those movies. They didn't really do that well, but from a box office perspective, they made a lot of money for Warner Brothers and DC, so they're continuing onwards. But in order for DC and Warner Brothers, I mean, we really should just say DC at this point, to be able to compete at some point or another with Marvel, they have to build a culture around these characters. They've got to make it so that they get these characters involved for a number of movies. You have those, contracts that go out. I mean, think about all the different characters in Marvel who've been around from basically the very beginning and just have been in all of these movies, or have, cameos in some of these movies. It's unbelievable. Whereas on the other side, you're going into another Batman. You're having another, you're going to have other characters that are brand new. What they got to do is just kind of build from the bottom here. I think what they really need to do is build off of the Batman. Regardless of how good or poor this movie is, they need to build off of this. And even if it's like kind of like the first movie in the series isn't amazing, or it's not, great, they can build off of that. And then, of course, Suicide Squad 2 is coming out, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's really important, guys, that this is something that, Warner Brothers and DC do in order to try to compete with Marvel. Now, what does Marvel do? I mean, they're just continuing onwards. Black Widow. I mean, tons of movies are going to be coming out. So they're just consistently building off of what they started. They don't want to slow down. They're not slowing down anytime soon. So DC, I think that they need to stop trying to play catch up and just build their own organic, fan base and such, because they've got the fan base. They got people who want to watch these movies, but they've got to just start from a very, a base. And I think that even though I believe that to this day that the base was started with Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, they waited too long. Now it needs to start with the Batman, in my opinion. They start with the Batman. This is one of the most iconic superheroes in all of comic books. So you start there and you build off of it. And look, there's a ton of question marks, guys. But guess what? There was a ton of question marks with Marvel. And when I say so far, as Marvel so far is, is winning the cinematic war against DC, even though it doesn't really seem like a war at this point, because Marvel is just completely eclipsed what DC was doing. And it's unfortunate, guys, because I'm a big DC fan, but these are just the facts, that Marvel has done a much better job with the cinematic universe than DC has, even though DC has some special things that are there underneath all the BS. They have something special there, but at the core, they just have to build an organic culture around these movies, and then I think they'll be in a decent spot. But all in all, guys, Marvel is going to continue going. You can just see they're continuing to build this thing, and probably once some of those actors and actresses, when their contracts are up, they're probably going to go ahead, either renew contracts, or they're going to start introducing new characters, and you're going to start loving other characters. And we all know that, of course, now Fox was bought out by Disney, which essentially now means that the X-Men universe is going to be coming in most likely to some of these movies. And so it's just going to go on and on and on. Whereas DC is still trying to get this thing right. They're trying things, they're greenlighting things, and nothing is working. So, at the end of the day, guys, Marvel's winning the cinematic war. But that doesn't mean that DC's out of this thing. And it doesn't mean that DC should even really care at this point, because they shouldn't. At this point, they should just worry about just being the best that they can in building a culture around their characters and these movies. And that's, at the end of the day, what really matters. Don't try to play catch up to Marvel. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Where do you guys think this cinematic war is going? Do you think Marvel's just going to keep going as far as just, eclipsing DC in every way, shape, and form? Or do you think DC is going to finally start building a foundation here for the future? Let me know what you guys think. And for more Marvel and DC content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.